Well, welcome back, everyone. It's always a sign of a good meeting when there's too much conversation and not enough time to come back to the formal sessions. But thank you for coming back, and thank you for your presence here. I have the privilege of chairing this third session. I'm Bhaskar Veera. The session is Collaborations in Conservation, Climate Resilience, and Livelihoods. And we have three wonderful speakers on stage already. I'm going to introduce all three, and then we'll go through our sequence. We start with a keynote, and then we'll have two further contributions. After the keynote, we'll pause briefly in order to take some questions for our keynote speaker, and then we'll move on to the next two presentations, and we'll take questions together. Turns out that they work on two opposite sides of the same forest, so this was all very well organized. So to start with, it's a real privilege to introduce our keynote speaker, Eric Danquah. I had the great privilege to visit Eric not so long ago in Ghana, and it's wonderful to welcome you back to Cambridge, Eric. Eric Danquah holds a professorship in plant genetics at the University of Ghana. He's a former dean of international programs. As the founding director of the West Africa Center for Crop Improvement, commonly known as WACI, at the University of Ghana since 2007. He's been pivotal in training a new generation of plant breeders focused on enhancing staple crops for Africa. He's adjunct professor at Cornell University, the University of Western Australia, and Murdoch University in Australia. Eric was instrumental in laying the groundwork for the African Plant Breeders Association, serving as its first president. He contributes his expertise to various international boards across the globe. Eric's research interests lie in identifying beneficial genes and traits to enhance staple crops across Africa. He secured over $40 million in funding, leading to significant advancements, including the development of world-class infrastructure for plant breeding education at the University of Ghana. His contributions to agricultural development include 166 peer-reviewed journal articles and the release of improved maize and tomato hybrids in Ghana. Eric has long-standing links with us at Cambridge. He received his BSc degree in crop science from the University of Ghana, and then an MPhil in plant breeding and a PhD in genetics from Cambridge. His works earned him many accolades, including the UG Distinguished Award for Meritorious Service in 2014, the 2018 Laureate Global Confederation of Higher Education Associations in Agriculture and Life Sciences World Agriculture Prize, and the 2022 Laureate Africa Food Prize. In 2023 and 2024, Reputation Poll International recognized him as one of the 100 most reputable Africans. The African Genius Awards presented him with the Outstanding African Achiever Award in 2023. Under his leadership, WACI has grown into a beacon of excellence, enrolling 160 PhD students from 19 African countries and boasting 111 graduates who are now at the forefront of national agricultural research initiatives across Africa. So I'm sure you'll all join me in welcoming Eric back to Cambridge. Eric, if you keep yourself seated for a minute longer, I'll introduce the other two speakers and I'll invite you up onto the stage. Our second speaker is going to be Professor Anil Madhav Peddy. Anil co-founded the Environment and Energy Group at the Computer Science Department here in Cambridge, where he researches global-scale computation and sensing for environmental conservation. He also holds an appointment at CCI, the Cambridge Conservation Initiative, where he directs the Cambridge Centre for Carbon Credits, 4C, and collaborates with NGOs such as the RSPB, BirdLife, and IUCN. Current major projects include more robust quantification of tropical forest carbon, to a new life global biodiversity metric to measure extinction risks, and a planetary computing platform to process the vast amounts of sensitive data involved in these computations. He's worked in academia and in startups over the past 2 decades and is a long-time maintainer on open source projects such as Docker, OpenBSD, OCamE, and Zen, which have been widely adopted across the world. Our third speaker is my student, Bowen Sayon. Bowen is doing an MPhil in conservation leadership. But more importantly, Bowen is the founder of the Nature Compact, one of the leading environmental and natural resource management advisory and research organizations in Liberia, and expanding across West Africa. Bowen has worked for over 15 years on environmental conservation in Liberia with Conservation International, Fauna and Flora International, the EU, and the World Bank. At the Forestry Development Authority, he worked as Deputy Managing Director for Operations and as Deputy Chief of Party of USAID Forest Incomes for Environmental Sustainability. Bowen has led the Nature Compact team to actively support the Environment Protection Agency and partners to mobilize the national response to address climate change threats in relation to policy development, engagement, education, awareness, and building local community resilience for adaptation. He's played a leading role in designing and managing the most important environmental conservation projects in Liberia, such as REDD+ and the Protected Areas Program of Liberia, while playing a leading role in the gazettement of 2 national parks, Gola Forest and Grebo Khan National Park. Bowen is a 2023 MasterCard Foundation Scholar enrolled here in Cambridge, specializing in conservation leadership. He has previous degrees in Integrated Land Use Systems Design and Sustainable Environmental Management from Freiburg and from the University of California, Berkeley. So I'm sure you will be delighted to have this wonderful group of 3 speakers. I'm going to start with handing over to our keynote speaker, Eric Danquah.
Thank you very much, Pro Vice Chancellor Baska, for the generous introduction. I'm sure people are expecting too much from me. Don't. I'd like to walk you through a few slides to show the work that we've been doing in the University of Ghana since I left this great university several years ago. I don't even remember some of the days in Cambridge, but of course, they were some of the best days in my life. Empowering innovation, developing talent for crop resilience, nutrition, and productivity in Africa. What can I say? Congratulations, Cambridge, Africa. I can see the 3 of them up here. I think it was by design. I recall in 2007, I think January, early 2007, I was then Dean of International Programs, and James Wood and I shared a bottle of wine in the home of the Deputy High Commissioner of UK in Accra. So I said to James, you have to come and see me. He came. That was the beginning of University of Ghana on board Cambridge, Africa, because James met Yainti Abedu, and their partnership led to great things for the University of Ghana. Thank you, Cambridge, Africa. Pauline was my undergrad student in the University of Ghana. When I saw her transcript, I was overly impressed, and I said, you have to apply to Cambridge. She did, and she came to Cambridge, and I recall her supervisor asking me to give her a reference for a PhD scholarship in Cambridge, for a PhD in Cambridge. Pauline, congratulations. And when Pauline ran Cambridge Africa, she brought me to see David Dan, and David and I met a couple of times, great meetings. I want to thank Corina for the kind invitation to come here today. I've come to meet my friends. Congratulations, Cambridge Africa. You've done a lot, Cambridge Africa, but because there's so much that we haven't done, it seems as if you have not done anything. But look at this young gentleman, John Iliblu, one of the future leaders of the West Africa Center for Crop Improvement. He came under the CAPREX Fellowship, and he's doing great with me. Nalamle also came to Cambridge, and she's almost a professor. I think she's already applied and will be a professor soon. So Cambridge Africa, you've done a lot, but of course, there's so much that we haven't done. What I want to do is to put myself in this journey, because I believe that I came here because of the African students, not because of David and James. Because I want to bring you back to Africa, because I believe we can change the narrative if we go back and work, and I believe we can. So I don't read anything on my slide, so kindly take notes of the outline. I just want to walk through a few points of context. Africa is one of the greatest continents. I believe in that, because I believe we are going to make it. I hope that it won't be as long as 2063, when some of us will not be here, but I believe we are going to make it soon. Why? Because we have the numbers, we have the youth, we have the land, we have everything. But someone once said, you don't eat potential. Of course, yes, we don't eat potential. But we are beginning to recognize the value of quality education. And I believe that is what is going to take us there. Agriculture is the mainstay of most African countries. Of course, if it contributes around 19% to GDP, I think it's quite substantial. But more important is that the estimated food market is around $1 trillion by 2030. This has been documented by the World Bank and also by the African Development Bank. This is real. We find that a diversity of crops feed us. Of course, we are crazy about diversity, and of course, diversity is the spice of life. And we believe that with this diversity, we are going to go far. But when we look at the drivers of agricultural growth, we find that in Africa, it's mainly been through land expansion. This has serious implications for so many things, challenges with sustainability. So we cannot continue like this, expanding our land. We have to do something about sustainable intensification, which we are working hard on. We are going to get the increase in yield per unit area. So you look at data, this is FAO data, 2023. You find that, of course, we know that even before COVID-19, Africa was not on track. Even though we're least affected by COVID-19, it has taken us forever to recover from the effects of COVID-19. And if you look at those figures, you find that Africa is the only place where, in fact, hunger is on the increase post-COVID-19. It's ridiculous for Africa, and we have to do something about this. And you see all of the other continents, hunger is coming down post-COVID-19. We have significant threats to regional food security. Of course, I would here look at the Western Central Africa sub-region alone. What we find is that in the next 7 years, we would have 69 million additional mouths to feed. Already we are about 500 million people in the region. Western Central Africa sub-region, about 500 million people. With 69 million additional mouths to feed, I wonder how we are going to make it by 2030. We are not going to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. One, because productivity is lowest in the region, and the food import bill is going up and up, rising. Ghana alone, we import about $3 billion of food items. At the same time, we have gone to the IMF to beg for $3 million bailout. And we have been trying to charge the government to rethink the model for development. So many threats to food insecurity. Of course, the conflict had implications for Africa because we import a lot of things. As for COVID-19, I say what it taught us was that we cannot wait for planes to arrive from Israel and France to give seed to farmers. The seeds that farmers grow in Africa must be from African scientists through the private sector to farmers. Of course, for 3 decades, we didn't do well in Africa. And it was championed by, I would say, a mafia of people, the World Bank leading that effort against quality tertiary education in Africa. So for 3 decades. Unfortunately, this was the period that I had my basic education through to PhD. It was by luck that we could pass through quality education thanks to the British taxpayer. I'll show you in a minute. But I would say here that the brain drain has serious consequences on Africa's development. And we have to look at models for development. I spent 3 months in fields in Germany when I was finishing my first degree in the University of Ghana. And those 3 months, those were the years 1984, before 1984, in Ghana, to get a cup of maize was a miracle. And to get a cup of rice was a miracle. I went through it myself because I was a student at the time. So coming to Cambridge and getting all that I got, I thought it would be ridiculous for me to remain in the UK because I really had seen pain in fields in Germany at the time that my mom was hungry in Africa. So why don't I return with my skills to see what I can do? Of course, that was great, but before graduating from Cambridge, I had to connect with the Americans, and I'm going to ask the UK today, you have an ambassador, use him, because I will sing the Cambridge song. I have partnered with the Americans because before I graduated from Cambridge, I was at a meeting, I met them, and they loved the work I did. I was one of the first to use molecular markers to tag genes of economic importance in barley. I also isolated microsatellites in the Echinochloa. We did some great work then, and the Americans wanted me for a postdoc. I said no. I wouldn't. That's him, Stephen Krzyzewicz. I now serve on his board in Cornell. I'm an adjunct too at Cornell. I would say my first decade was very challenging, extremely challenging. It took 2004 for a new program, the Teaching and Learning Innovation Fund, to come on board for me to access a small grant which took me to Cornell to begin conversations. And the rest is what I want to talk about. 2 big grants, one from the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, AGRA, in 2007, a second from the World Bank, $13.5 million in 2015, have allowed us to do what we should do. We transformed our space. I remember I didn't mention Kate Pretty when she was Deputy Vice Chancellor International. I came to meet her when I was Dean, and she said, Eric, if you want your students to come back, go and develop your labs. So I've come to tell Kate and Prof Vice Chancellor, we have developed our labs. We have first-class facilities. We have first-class facilities, and any British postdoc will be happy to spend a year in Cambridge, and I'm happy Giles is here. We are talking. At the West Africa Center for Crop Improvement, we have 2 programs, PhD in plant breeding, one of the best in the world for training Africans in Africa for Africa, and also a master's in seed science and technology, which is becoming the place to go to if you want to work for the private sector. Our PhD program in plant breeding is such that it's a split-side training program. So if you came from Nigeria, for example, you can go back to Nigeria for your PhD research. We follow you, we supervise you, co-supervise you with, for example, IITA and other CGIAR institutions. And it has worked very well. Along the line, we had to bring on board a youth development space we call the Kofi Annan Enterprise Hub for Ag Innovation, which is also doing great. What we do is that the youth come, we change the ideas into innovations. They run with the innovations, and a number of them have really given hope to communities after returning. And I'm surprised that the foundations are not seeing value in what we are doing. We partnered first with MIT. They came, their business school, they came and we developed the program. Then the Erasmus Center for Entrepreneurship at Rotterdam came, and we developed a module which we use to train students. Now we got a grant from a foundation in Ghana. We can give prizes. Our PhD students have a lot of innovations, 101 PhDs. We have trained who are on top of their work, working in 15 countries now. We have released over 279 varieties, over $100 million we have attracted. And look at this. That is training Africans in Africa for Africa. Those in red have been hired by the CGIAR. And I say, it has to be like football where we have to charge hiring fees. And I think we are beginning to look at that. Our students have released innovations. They are the champions in their countries, and in research, a number of great publications. These are practical solutions to the problems of Africa, using foresight and good science to develop new varieties for farmers. You can see all these are in partnerships with great partners, the CG, some with Cornell and some with Purdue. We have done some great work with our students. A number of great guys, and those of you who knew Sir Gordon Conway, when he came to the West Africa Center for Crop Improvement in 2011, he said to me, the first thing I want to say to you is an apology, because when I was president of the Rockefeller Foundation, we should have done something like the West Africa Center for Crop Improvement. Awards and recognitions, we cannot gloss over them. They are important. They should attract funding to us. We are now thinking about an African Academy of Sciences. I'm talking to Giles and a number of partners. I believe we can move this forward. We are collaborating with strategic partners so we can do more of split site training. We want scientists in Africa, when they go back to Africa, they don't become like me. They become some of the best scientists in the world, and I hope that it comes to life in my lifetime. I say leadership is destiny. We have to train the next generation of leaders. We are training them well, equipping them with the necessary skills and knowledge that they need to lead Africa properly. We need to work on adaptive traits for food security. We are working on that. We are using a convergence of sciences, modern platforms. We need new partners. We have to dissect the complex traits that we find so we can move forward. My faculty, they are leading groundbreaking research. Of course, they need strategic partnerships so they can move forward. They are working on a range of crops. We have partnered with the Cambridge Crop Science Center, had reciprocal visits. Giles, thanks for that collaboration. We need some heavy investments in this collaboration so that we can run with our ideas and develop products that can get to the markets. I want to leave you with this crop. Bambara granules, I think, is a great crop. It's an underutilized species. We need to address its biology and ensure that we double yields. We can do that with good science, and I'm beginning to work in partnerships with a number of institutions. The US government has launched the vision for adapted crops and soils, and we believe this is going to be great. And if we could get partners here so we can think about how we make this crop the crop for Africa. It's a green legume, and I tell you, it was said in folklore that this was the first food that a bride prepared for the groom. And if you did that, your marriage would be 100 years. What we have done is we have, of course, we know the product profile that we are looking for. And if you know this, you just have to run with your ideas. We can get there. We want to develop a functional gene discovery approach. We want to go into genome editing of the crop and ensure that in real time we deliver varieties to farmers. I believe we can do it because Africa believed in the Africa they found. This is the first president of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, the African of the last millennium. This is what he said. And look at that. If we had that vision, why are we not here? Because those who followed him have failed us. We need you back, African students. Those of you who have a vision, let us fix Africa. I believe we can fix Africa. So I conclude that there is nothing better than quality education. If you deliver good products, the private sector will come and partner with you. So I'm looking for these bright people coming back to us so together we build Africa. I believe working together, we can change the paradigm. I want to acknowledge certain people. Matt Nevans, I believe Cambridge, you know him. He was my advisor, and I saw him every day. Great. When he went to Cardiff, I chased him there. My Gale of blessed memory was at John Ennis, director there. I planned to do some work with him, and he was like, I'll call him, I go to John Ennis, he says, Eric, let's go home. Great mentorship, and of course, Richard Flavel taught me about technology. He came to your lecture room and you wanted to become a scientist. My supervisor of blessed memory, Department of Genetics, John Barrett, there has been no one like him. There was no one like him. When he passed away too early, and when he passed, I'll tell you my last story. I got a letter from his 80-year-old mother, written in ink. The woman said, Eric, I don't know if you have heard, but John passed. Eric, I'm writing to you because John said you were an African of a kind, and he believed I would do something for Africa. I'm looking for that thing to do. And I hope that we can collaborate to do that thing for Africa, because Africa must change. I want to thank all of you. I hope that we can collaborate better. Thank you.
Why don't you join me? We take a couple of questions before we move on to our next speaker. I can already see hands going up, so why don't we start there? Is there a microphone going around? Is that the protocol? Thank you. So one up here, and then another question.
Very great talk, Eric, and congratulations for the good work that you've done. Quick inquiries. I'm keen to hear about the government's investment in your research lab. I'm keen to hear about some of the products that you've commercialized out of your research lab. I'm keen to hear about the intellectual property that you are attracting, but also that your PhD students are benefiting from this marvelous work you're doing.
Right. Thank you. Eric, don't respond. Let's take the second question as well. Then
great talk. Just two questions. One about, I know there's always a mention about brain drain, the aspirants come back home, fix home, and sometimes there's no room for the aspirants to fix home. My question is, there are millions of young people in Africa, very talented, but don't have the opportunities at home. So instead of asking the aspirants, there are people who just move back naturally to support. But I think people need to have that option. But my concern is more about the people, the talents that we already have at home, and don't have the opportunities to utilize those talents due to reduced infrastructure and some of the problems that you mentioned. Is there any active maybe policies or work going on to sort of encourage the people who are already there to do the work that they want to do but can't really have the opportunity? Secondly, on indigenous resources, Bambara groundnut is my favorite crop. And I know it's really an indigenous crop. So like the first person asks, are there any sort of active laws in terms of protecting IP? Because when we start to talk about these crops with Global North partners, sometimes what happens is due to the reduced infrastructural deficits at home, where many researchers who work on these crops cannot really do so much with it, it then ends up on this part of the world where it's utilized to create new things, and we lose culture, we lose language, we lose everything associated with it. So what are the IP regulations currently to support African researchers and to protect bioresources, indigenous knowledge, and all of that?
thank you. Eric, I'm going to hand over to
Right, thanks. I think these are good questions, and I would like to know your area and have a conversation with you, because I think I want to change your thinking. I don't think that we can rely on the Africans there who have something to do. I want to engage you better. The question is, do you believe in yourself? Do you believe you can change Africa? If you do, come, let's go, and let's change Africa. I wouldn't think about those there, and I'm not government. And I don't look at government to do what I do. I have a foundation from my award that I give to the youth. You can ask some of my students are here, they will tell you. So if you believe you can change Africa, come, let's begin a new journey. I don't look at those who are there. I'm not a policy maker. I'm a humble manager of a small project. But I believe if everyone who could manage a small project well came back, Africa would travel miles. To your question, I think government of Ghana, not much. I can say that for the building, we're fortunate it was our 10th anniversary 7 years ago. And 3 ministers, you saw them in one of the photographs. I couldn't have time to walk you through every bit of it. But they came, and the Minister of Finance was part, for the first time in the history of Ghana, in a small university function. 3 cabinet ministers were there. And the Minister of Finance gave us $1 million to finish our building in record time. 1 year we had finished the building. That was great. As regards innovations with the private sector, yes, I showed maize and tomato hybrids that we are working in partnership with the private sector to take to scale. So we have an agreement, and hopefully the royalties will come in and we can think about sustainability. So it's slowly but surely, we need all the good people who have a dream for Africa to come back. Let's dream big for Africa. That's what I can say. But young lady, we can have an engagement, because I think we need change mindsets for taking Africa forward.
Eric, can you share anything about the IP questions?
IP questions, I think I haven't looked at some of it very well, but we have, at the University of Ghana, we have an office for research, innovation, and development. They have nice policy for IP, and we ensure that agreements are properly done before any collaborations. So we have an office solely dedicated for IP issues.
Wonderful. Thank you, Eric. Thank you for spending time with us.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to hand over to Anil next, and like before, I'm going to go and sit and watch your presentation from the side.
Sounds perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. I think, do I need to switch? Oh, it's switching for me. I'm a professor in computer science here, and I founded the Energy and Environment Group with Srinivasan Keshav and Emily Shakpura. And we're based out in West Cambridge, and we work with the Cambridge Conservation Initiative. Now, I was very jealous after Eric's talk because our facilities are not as good as the ones we just saw in Ghana, so I think we'll relocate over the next year or so over there. But what we do is that we're driven by a passion for tropical forest conservation. So tropical forests are about 5% of the world's land surface, terrestrial land surface, and they're disappearing at a really fast rate, but they're home to 2/3 of the world's terrestrial biodiversity. So between Colombia, the Amazon, the Central African rainforest and the Congo and the Gola rainforest, and Indonesia and Madagascar, you've got this belt across the equator where a huge amount of diversity is present on a relatively concentrated piece of land. And so the thesis should be that this land should be very valuable from a humanity spatial perspective, but the reality is that the land is being deforested at a huge rate. And so this is showing Ecuador, but the same idea holds throughout all of the world's rainforests, where human anthropogenic needs have gradually led to more and more degradation and conversion of the land into usually into agricultural purposes or any other industrial purposes. So while, of course, it's true, we heard from Eric that one of the biggest sources of expansions in Africa has been land use for agriculture. It's incredibly important to feed the world's population. It's also necessary to find a balance between the conservation of very, very precious biodiverse lands. And so what we're really trying to do is to figure out where we can find that balance. How do we find mechanisms to intensify agriculture so we can stop using more, especially tropical rainforest land, and balance that against the needs to make sure that we have a diversity in our human needs as well. And so one of the obvious ways to do this is that we can't go to local people in any of the tropical rainforest regions and ask them to just to stop agriculture, because this is a key part of the livelihoods for the locals. And there are many initiatives going on which aim to supply alternative livelihoods that will provide a mechanism which is not as profitable as the direct agriculture, but will preserve the rainforests and then provide alternative financing mechanisms to make up the difference and hopefully be more profitable in aggregate. So one of those is in the Gola rainforest, and this is an amazing rainforest in Sierra Leone and Liberia, and we'll hear from the next speaker as well about his work on the Liberian side, but mainly I've been working on the Sierra Leone side. And here, there's been a long-running project which is replacing palm oil and other kind of clear-cut agriculture with sustainable cocoa production as well. And this has been done here in collaboration with the RSPB and the Cambridge Conservation Initiative, but also working with the Gola Rainforest Company in Sierra Leone. So I've got a brief video to explain this project a little bit more.
When I'm going deep in the forest today, I'm very, very, very happy. That is why I'm a ranger. I'm here to protect this forest and its biodiversity. I love it. I love the forest. Job in the forest. I'm a tour guide. I like to share the forest with the visitors. My favorite animal is the picatatis. They are sensitive. Wherever you saw the picatatis, they are right in the primary forest. They are really shy.
My name is Ansu Kamara. I'm a cocoa farmer. I like the forest because the relationship between the forest and the cocoa is very much important. For those that were planting very close to the forest, we will continue harvesting to the end of March. But for those that are far away from the forest, they will stop harvesting around January. Yeah. When the cooperatives were introduced here, the GRC staff came and introduced a lot of practices to us. They gave us a lot of training, like the nursing, pruning, how to harvest the cocoa pod from the tree, how to ferment the beans, and they also train us how to dry it to get a good quality.
My name is Abbas Tawa. I'm very, very proud to be a ranger. I have many skills. I have done a lot of training. The terrain, the area today I'm going, I don't know what is going on there. So we are going to sleep there tonight. We are going to pass 8 days before coming here back. So if you don't love job, or if you don't love something, you won't do that. I'm very, very proud.
So as you can see, this is a hugely impactful project that is very ambitious. So for the last 10 years, it's been providing an alternative livelihood, which is preventing some deforestation of the Golo rainforest and is improving local livelihoods as well. As an aside, you can actually buy the Golo rainforest chocolate through the RSPB website, and hopefully next year here for lunch we can try some of the chocolate. It's absolutely delicious. But generally speaking, these projects are a win-win if they're constructed correctly, because in addition to providing the carbon sequestration we get from the old growth rainforests, local livelihoods can be improved. Biodiversity in these old forests is much more present than if you plant new trees, and it also helps to preserve the water systems of the local environment as well. So it's really important to structure these and make them work really well. But the problem is, when it comes to funding these and financing these projects, how do we know which project is doing a good job of forest protection, which ones are doing a bad job? And the fundamental problem is that there's lots of different reasons why trees can die off in forests. It could be floods, it could be fires, it could be insects, it could be wind, and it could also be human activity as well. And right now, whenever we design these carbon credit schemes with the projects, they declare their own rate of background deforestation. So each project declares how much of the forest is disappearing in general, and then how much they need to be measured in order to provide a difference to assess their effectiveness. Now, of course, this is quite a difficult thing to get right, because if you misjudge the effectiveness or if you overestimate it, then it means that the statistics are fairly inaccurate as well. And so what we've been aiming to do is to provide an objective global baseline using satellite technology so that we can provide these projects with much more information about the background rates of deforestation to give them a much more predictable and sustainable source of data to judge their own activities and to know when things are going well and going badly as well. And so the basic idea behind a high integrity carbon credit is that we need to find different dimensions by which we measure these long running, often for decade projects and try to figure out where we can help with computer science by using quantitative methods and where we should defer to the qualitative on the ground assessments which decide other aspects of the project. So we've heard in the video about many of the qualitative aspects there, the impact on local livelihoods, the positive impacts for the community, the justice frameworks around helping to build schools and community frameworks, and also the preservation of the forest by the rangers to protect the biodiversity. And so as a computer scientist, where I come in is trying to help with supplying global data for the quantitative side of things so that the humans on the ground can focus on those qualitative and very important impacts on the local people as well. And so the kind of questions we're thinking about is, how do we figure out how additional a project is versus not doing the project at all in terms of forest protection? And if we do this project, are there negative effects elsewhere in the country and worldwide? And also, how long will this project last? And how should we adjust for a short project versus a long project in terms of the long-term success and sustainability of these things? And all of these can combine into forming carbon credits, which can form the basis of defensible carbon finance if we get it right. And the success of these carbon credit schemes will drive much more finance and enable the expansion of REDD+ programs, such as the one that you saw in Sierra Leone there. Now, where do we get all this data from? The good news is that we have tens of thousands of satellites in the sky these days, and we have more information about the state of our planet than we've ever had in the history of humanity. And of these satellites, many are used for communications, but about 1,000 are used for Earth observations. And what these satellites do is that they sweep around the planet in different orbits, and they use different instruments to take signals regularly about the state of the planet. So this one is from NASA Landsat from 1984, and it uses what's known as a multispectral sensor to give visible images, but also near infrared and shortwave infrared feedback from the planet. And then as it goes through this polar orbit, it gives us wonderful pictures of the planet from which we can start to figure out which parts are forests, which parts are ocean, and which parts are cities, for example. Now, when you take these, you can start to combine them into deforestation maps. So just using the basic information from space. And this is showing Brazil here because the Amazon has been about 20% degraded in the last 30 years or so. And you can see here the sweep of deforestation, which is the orange pixels, as we advance through the year. So there's frontiers of deforestation that are being fed by various supply chains, such as the need for agriculture and also the building of infrastructure to support that kind of deforestation as well. But if we want to get really accurate, especially for smaller areas, we need to do even better than that. And so it turns out that on the International Space Station, there's actually an instrument which is a giant space laser. And this uses the same technology that we have in self-driving cars, for example, to map an extremely accurate topology of the Earth. And what JEDI does is that it fires multiple lasers, and it goes only mainly over the tropical belt, which is very convenient for, obviously, for rainforests. It stops just south of Cambridge, so we don't have much data about our own city. But what it does, it sweeps through it at very, very high speed, and it bounces the lasers off to give you a very accurate view of the world's surface. And then from this, the data is read back on the International Space Station with instruments so accurate that we can actually tell when an astronaut is going to the toilet on the space station, because the flushing actually disrupts the sensor, and you can actually tell exactly to almost a per tree density in some cases exactly what is up there. And it allows us to build really accurate, beautiful maps when combined with the other satellites about generally what the shape of the planet is from a three-dimensional sense. So we can use some instruments to figure out what different species are, some to figure out how high the trees are, some to figure out what the ground topology is, and together form a very accurate map of where the world's forests lie. So given all this data, what we want to do now is to figure out how do we then calculate in a systematic and defensible way some of the quantitative benefits of that wonderful Gola project that we just saw in the video earlier on. The first one, and perhaps the most important one, is additionality. And the idea here is that we don't want to fund the entirety of forest protection. That's got to be done by governments. But what we can do is that if there is a project being set up, and that project is essentially a delta over what's happening in the background, then we should be able to, with an intervention, figure out what the delta is between the two of them. And when we do this, we can use this to calculate what is known as additionality. So I can show you this very quickly on my laptop. So here we have the Gola rainforest that we just saw in the video, and this is the project area for the Gola rainforest. And then what we're going to do is treat this like a drug trial. So we're going to find within the rainforest areas some samples of how many trees there are. And then we're going to find physically similar areas outside of the project area, which are physically as similar as possible to the protected area, except that they're not under conservation protection. There's no REDD+ program. But they have the same species of trees, the same elevation, distance from roads, and so on. And then using this kind of satellite-based sampling, we can figure out what is the amount of deforestation happening for the control areas, which is in blue, the bit outside the protection area, and then how much protection is happening within the project area. And so this is very similar to a drug trial where you control for all variables except for the one that you're looking for, and then we can use satellite data to basically get a full view of the Gola Rainforest project, and you can see where all of the other physically similar trees are, which unfortunately there's so much deforestation in the north in Sierra Leone that there's not many other areas with rainforests, and you can see the difference between the two projects there. So we can use satellite data to calculate how much of an extra impact that this particular conservation project is having as well. So once this is done, this allows us to figure out the additional impact of the project. Once we're done with that, we also then have to make sure that the presence of the project does not cause any unexpected side effects. So if we're reducing the amount of agriculture happening because of the project, then usually what happens is that the demand for that crop does not just disappear. Instead, something nearby gets deforested in order to continue to satisfy the demand for that crop. And so we use similar techniques to basically try to spot if there's any extra deforestation as a result of the project by, again, running through the satellite data and looking for any unexpected extra deforestation in the local area as well. And then finally, the last bit of quantification is using the satellite data over a number of years to figure out how the project will go after the end of the project. And there's a few obvious ways that this could go. The first one is that if the governments all agree to the COP26 principles of ending deforestation by 2030, then there will be stabilized land use after the project ends, because deforestation as a net will be prohibited by international agreements. In practice, what happens is that once the project ends, then the deforestation goes back to the old counterfactual, and it increases again afterwards. So we have to account for what to do if a project only survives for 10 or 20 years, and the finance disappears, and the deforestation continues. There's some value, because we've halted the deforestation for 20 years, but it's not as good as storing that carbon in the ground for 100,000 years as well. And so all of these things we can calculate using quantitative methods, and we've ended up with the idea of a carbon credit, which can use satellite information, and it can take the quantitative data that we have by using all this satellite information, such as additionality, leakage, and permanence for long-term carbon storage, and then come up with the notion of a number which is comparable with other projects throughout Africa and throughout the world as well. And this way we can start to compare projects with each other, learn from each other, and try to figure out exactly which interventions are working in terms of forest protection much more equitably than what the things we do right now. And of course, this is not possible to do effectively without accounting very, very strongly for all the co-benefits as well, which is the biodiversity, the livelihoods, and the justice impacts for each individual project, and that is done qualitatively as well. Now, when we do this, we're calling this new carbon credit a pact. And the idea behind a pact is that it's one carbon credit called a permanent additional carbon ton, which represents all of the quantitative numbers that have been adjusted in such a way that we all don't have to worry about it. There's the number crunching is happening in the background, and it represents 1 ton of climate benefit because of forests that would otherwise have been cut down and has not led to any other damage happening elsewhere in the world that we can find. And so therefore, it's an effective way of offsetting any unavoidable emissions that we have. So in the case of Cambridge, for example, we have some unavoidable emissions that we're unlikely to ever get rid of. So one example is international air travel. We can use trains, we can use automobiles and so on to get around the local area, but ultimately, to go to international conferences or to facilitate this kind of event, we need to fly. And so if there's no alternative but to fly, then we're positing that these pacts are a good way for institutions like the university to offset our climate damage and to have very high impact financing go towards, for example, African rainforest conservation. And this way, we can offset not only the damage of our operations, but we can also support extremely high biodiversity and good livelihood areas in Africa as well. If anyone is interested in this, we ended up publishing a report with Cambridge. And what this shows us is something very interesting. We compared a number of different types of carbon credit projects. Some of them involve no nature-based conservation at all. So things like in Iceland, grabbing carbon from the air and pumping it into the ground. Other ones involve tree planting, so not protecting old forests. And some of them involve planting trees here locally in Cambridge. When you take all of the various adjustments that we did from additionality, leakage, and permanence, you can see here that there's a pound adjusted per ton of carbon. And what this shows us is that you can pay up to 825 pounds per ton of carbon if you invest in a high technology offset project, such as the one where in Iceland where you put air and you drill it into the ground and you store carbon that way. The Gola Rainforest project, in comparison, is a tenth of the price. So it is hugely underpriced for the value from the perspective of carbon and biodiversity that we're getting from it. So what we're really trying to do is to show that by using these globally comparable methods, more financing can go to tropical rainforests, because right now they're going very, very cheaply, and we want to increase the sustainability and the profitability of the projects in the ground, and so we can justify closing this gap, which we've arrived at by using very open, transparent, and global satellite-based methods. And then, once we have this price per ton of quantitative carbon, we can also rate each project on its qualitative benefits. And you can see, for example, the African rainforest projects have been certified by the RSPB and so on. And so they're all rated well. But then if you look at some of the more expensive projects that are not nature-based, they have no biodiversity impact, they have limited livelihood benefits and so on. And so you can start to select based on the perfect projects, and often this ends up being African and South American and Indonesian rainforest conservation projects. So hopefully, I've shown you how we can combine large-scale data with the qualitative data from our colleagues in social sciences and conservation to make a strong case for why we should be putting more money into forest conservation and channeling that money towards local livelihood benefit in order to have a new generation of green-collar workers that can not only prosper from their beautiful regions in the rainforests, but also be protecting nature while doing so as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anand. I know there are going to be lots of questions for you, but we're going to move straight on to Rowan's presentation, and then we take questions together at the end of that.
Perfect. I'll just put on Govin's talk here. You're welcome.
Nothing is harder than speaking after a scientist. It's one of the worst things, one of the worst feelings ever. Then to make it worse again is when your professor is in the room and you have to leave. Well, I know I will do my best on this one. From the scientific side, I will bring you back to Earth. I will bring you back to the social aspects of this entire thing. And I will be talking about leveraging partnerships to achieve conservation outcomes. Before I start, I would like to say a big thank you to Cambridge, Africa. Thanks to everyone who made it possible to get me here. Madam Tabitha, thank you so much to MasterCard. Thanks to all my colleagues for bearing with me. And thanks to my professor who has endured our numerous questions in our class. But I would like to bring you a Liberian perspective of things. People will never conserve anything unless it is beneficial to them. from the private sector to government to local communities to donors to whoever. If there's no common interest, no commonality, it won't work. And the only premise for that to happen is when there is fair and equal partnerships. So the first word we must introduce in the room is let's decolonize. Let's talk about fairness. Let's be as practical as much as possible. Africa brings a lot of opportunities to the table. And after almost 400 years, we must be treated fairly and equally. I know I might piss a few persons off, but I know, well, it comes to the territory. When you educate me, what else can I practice? So, my story so far. I grew up in the civil war in my country, Liberia. I wanted to be many things. I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to be an engineer, a lawyer. I wanted to be a builder. I wanted to be everything because my father said I can be everything, anything I want to be. And I know most of you in the room, you are victims of that too as well. So you start up and, eventually as you get older, you start saying, but no, this isn't my interest. I want to do this. I want to do this. I want to do this. Now and then battle lines are drawn. This wasn't the plan. Well, I have a plan too as well. And in my case, when the future came, I started by a mistake. I had this very radical professor, rest in peace, Professor Cassell. I was on my way to medical school, and he was like, well, why don't you understand that the environment is a determinant of health, and as such, you can blend health and environment to create a One Health approach. So it was something I really liked, and then I started following through on it. 15, 16 years later, when I started as an intern, I rose up. I was hungry. I'm always hungry to grow. I'm always hungry to just bang on doors. I started, I worked with most of the international partners back at home. I was privileged. I was blessed. From a technical manager to strategic advisor, I was one of the youngest. I had privilege going with the World Bank and other people. And then eventually, there's something called Peter Principle. As you continuously serve, you get to a realization that you don't know much. And because you are interacting with many new concepts, you get more confused. For example, what Professor Anel presented here just now, I was scratching my head and said, well, technically I don't know much again, because when it comes to dealing with red and climate change, I thought I was an expert, but clearly he's a whole different monk in this entire thing, and I appreciate that. So, you'll notice that way up in the corner, I started my career just creating awareness, trying to establish conservation clubs, environmental clubs after graduation, just trying to get stuff done. Then I fell in love with animals. Liberia is very diverse. There's a lot of opportunities. We created a small rescue center for chimps and other animals that were subjected to illegal wildlife trade. We started bringing some international partners around, and then they took an interest in us. And I just kept going. If there's a topic, I'm going to go. If there's a topic, I'm going to go. So from dealing with practical conservation issues to working in the field, working with people, listening to old men in the forest, in the communities on how nature should be conserved. So eventually, I was recognized by my president by mistake. I was in a meeting and one guy said something, and she happened to just step in. I didn't know she was coming in. I kind of disagree. I was an outlier, and then eventually, somebody said something about me. Eventually, I was privileged to be appointed as the youngest deputy managing director for operations back when President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, first president, female president in Liberia, in Africa. So, but then where is Liberia? What about Liberia? What's important about Liberia? My country is very green. It's one of the greenest countries in the world. Everything grows. We are We are a small country, small population of 5.6 million persons. 63% of my country is under 25. You know, we're a fairly young population. The forest resource in the entire Upper Guinea forest ecosystem, Liberia accounts for over 44% of the forest cover, and the forest starts from all the way from Senegal all the way down to Togo. Liberia contains 44% of all the forest there. Liberia entire land mass, you know, the forest of Liberia is around 68%. That's around twice the size of Belgium. You know, Belgium, the country. So it's amazing for us. But the truth is, half of everybody depend on the forest. Half of my country population depend on the forest. Everybody, indirectly and directly, people live in the forest. People depend on the forest for everything. We have over 4,000 endangered species that include over 2,000 plus plants. We have 193 mammals and so forth. This, for example, I think Professor Anel talked about the peak arthritis. Is one of the favorite birds in my region. We have the forest elephant, the pangolin, and the dino monkey. These are all charismatic species that you know gave West Africa its place in terms of diversity. But equally so, there's threats, there are challenges. We are extremely poor. We are rich, but extremely poor. The challenge of bushmeat consumption, the challenge of illegal wildlife trade, challenge of habitat destruction, the challenge of corruption. No region. In fact, the Nigerians might boast about corruption, but you haven't seen corruption yet. You know? You haven't seen corruption yet. I mean, my country can, all of a sudden, 150 million can just get missing and nobody know where it went. You know, and so I know you guys can brag about corruption, but trust me, we are there too as well. You know, so weak policy. We are good at developing laws, but we are bad at implementing them. Inadequate livelihood plagues everybody. I grew up in poverty. I'm no different from most of you. But the legacy of the Civil War, the legacy of the economic sanctions in my country, my former president was accused of using timber to fuel the civil crisis in Sierra Leone. And right now, I think he's in the UK here in prison. I think 56 years. He was gonna die there. So, but the legacy of the Civil War has impacted us. So my generation is strapped. Those who are younger than me, they have privilege. But we who grew up in the war, we are very, very behind, and we are very, very hungry to get things right, to set the country back on path. And so the legacy of the Civil War is continuously looming above us. But the impact of climate change too as well is one of those challenges that we have. But to deal with all of these challenges, partnership is key. People will never conserve anything, regardless of how simple or how complex it is, unless it is important to them, unless it is in their interest to do so. So Manjara Matai, the daughter of this Kenyan icon, she said this. She said, in conservation, we don't have much time with the looming climate crisis. She said, we cannot do it alone. We need to partner. Nobody can do it alone. You need local communities, government, private sector, and more. We need to partner in better and more equal ways, and to resource those partnerships as well. We need to be inspired by the good partnership stories so we replicate what is working well. And we must be able to continuously say it. We must be able to be agents of change. We must be able to say that regardless of what's on the news, there are certain things that work and certain things that don't work in my country. So for us to do that, fundamentally, my organization where I work for the last couple of years, my major thing was how do we empower rural women? How do we empower local farmers? How do we empower youth to be the face of conservation? regardless of how complex it is. And for us to do that, we have worked on several tiers of partnerships, from the international to local partnerships between international organizations and local organizations to create protected areas, to manage protected areas. My country has a protected area network of 26, and we're still working on it. We are one of the first countries we are one of the first countries that have achieved the 30 by 30 because we have made it a law. Even before we started talking about 30 by 30 in global biodiversity and protecting landscapes, my country from 2005 made that decision. Government and NGOs, it can be frosty. It can be frosty most times. Sometimes our government tend to ban NGOs for the reports that they release, but actually it's a work in progress. Public-private partnerships for us is one of the most important because Liberia has only leveraged its natural resources to be able to develop. And because of that, most of our initiatives center around these 4 points. Within the international and local partnerships, we have been able to protect around 68% of our country in forests. We have been able to sign conservation agreements, which is a quid pro quo arrangement with communities, that communities actually will be able to benefit in practical terms. It's not from, we're transitioning from a place where communities are just, just receiving grants and receiving handouts to a place of trade. And we've done well so far. We have actively supported agroforestry. It's a work in progress, creating community enterprises. We are also doing intensive biodiversity monitoring in my country. A lot of young people now, a lot of youth, a lot of women are taking interest in biodiversity monitoring, but the work is still required. But, as with everything, the challenge of conservation is still there. The challenge of partnerships is still there. As you can see, this woman was one of the most vocal women when we went to create awareness because she did not understand and it wasn't in her interest to do so. And that's the truth. Sometimes the issues that we present, most times the intentions are unclear and the agenda, they're very convoluted. Most times we present conservation messaging in a very, very dark way until people tend to get disinterested from it. And as practitioners, those who work in agriculture and natural resource management, we must change. The lack of appreciation of local context. Most times we fly in with these complex methodologies and we think we know. But there was forest there. There has been forest there even before you brought your complex ideas. So you must be able to rely on the cultural context too as well. The confusion of the roles in partnerships. These international organizations, all of us who are Cambridge educated, we go into these communities, we don't clearly outline what the roles are in the relationship that we create. And because of that, most conservation projects fail. And as long as it continues to fail, the forest will continue to shrink. Weak communication. Most times we don't even want to talk to the people because we feel that they are not at our level. And sometimes even when we try to have a conversation with them, we use these big words. Carbon dioxide. Nobody sees carbon dioxide. That woman, this woman. Do you think she knows what carbon dioxide is? She doesn't care. She doesn't know because we have to be able to, have perfect communication tactics. The short-term approach to partnerships. There is this new movement that conservation, RED and climate change and carbon finance will give us up to 30 years of investment. But then after that, what? After that, what? We have to be able to think. The lack of trust. Every time in my country, every time in these local communities, regardless of how we say these messages, but there's a fundamental distrust as long as there is a white man bringing that message. I'm sorry, but that's the truth. There's a fundamental distrust. There is this pendulum approach of trade that whenever we try to conform to this new aspect of red, this new aspect of carbon change, or climate change, then it suddenly switches in to another thing. If you think I'm lying, how many conference of parties have we been to? Can we access carbon financing yet? Where is the market? Who determines the price? Is it fair? Okay, while we are still discussing the price, our forest is still sequestering. Who's paying for it? Nobody's answering that question. And we must always have a way to be able to have those conversations. To leverage partnerships, you should know that it has to be a quid pro quo arrangement. It must be you do something for me, I do something for you. We must be partners in that. The investments of these climate finance projects, until it reaches to the community, it has to be investment ready. Because most times these projects tend to just bog the communities down in administrative processes and studies until the people tend to have no interest in it. Blended finance also, there's no one mechanism that actually is going to work. We must be able to innovate and find better ways, better solutions. Long-term commitment. The reason we funded Nature Compact was because after 10 years, after 15 years, most of these international conservation organizations tend to leave as long as their finances go. But most times we found out that communities will only trust those who have a long-term plan to say, you know what, we're going to stay in this community, we're going to work there for as long as possible. The stakeholder participation. Participation is not only in the mouth. Participation must be integrated as much as possible. So what's next for me? I am one of those privileged persons who happened to be at Cambridge. I never thought it would happen. Cambridge, Africa has given me an opportunity to stand in front of you. But how many others who don't have this opportunity too as well? So how can I be an agent of change? At Nature Compact, we want to be, when we aspire to be the catalyst to making that happen. This opportunity, a lot of persons are looking at me now in my country for opportunities to have access to this place. So what's next for me is I'm going to be, as much as possible, a beacon of hope, a leader, someone who's here to make a difference and to conserve and manage our natural resources, our heritage into perpetuity. Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Very useful. Thank you. I think we've got time for a couple of questions from the audience, and then we'll have a short 20-minute break before the next session. So let's take a few questions from the back.
Hi, thank you all for your presentations. They were quite nice. So, Bowen, I'm actually addressing my question to you, and I would like to give a little bit of context to my question. So I come from the southeastern part of Nigeria, and I come from like a very local community. And recently in my community, the leadership of my community has started like clear-cutting the forest we have and then portioning the lands so that people can buy and build houses. And what baffles me the most is the people who actually organize these projects. They are quite educated, I mean, even tertiary institutions. And I keep asking, what are we doing? I mean, people go to school and they still don't understand the idea of conserving our biodiversity. Because when you clear the forest, we lose plant biodiversity, we also lose the animals, and this is their homes. So how do we, integrate the idea of biodiversity conservations into our educational institutions? That somebody who, even if he stops at the primary school level, should understand the importance of keeping the forest. We should be able to understand the repercussions of cutting down our forest. So how do we achieve that? That an average African or Nigerian, in my case, understands that cutting forest is not good. Then my second question is, my culture, women are not allowed to go to village meetings. Now I've seen this, and I'm bothered by it because I'm a plant scientist and I understand what the implications of cutting the forest or the forest is or are. But how do I come in to say this is what we are doing and it's wrong? Because the platform to actually contribute to decision making is not there. So what's the practical approach we can use to first integrate these ideas across our educational institutions, and also as women who may not actually have access to places where these decisions are made, how can we participate in educating people or creating awareness about these issues?
Borwin, why don't you respond to those, and I'll try and spot some more questions while you're doing that.
Great. Thanks so much. There's no one silver bullet, I would say, to answer that question, this first one, other than the fact that we must, as Africans, our livelihoods, our culture, and everything about us is tied around the forest. And until we start to appreciate the cultural aspects of the forest, we all come from similar lineage where decisions concerning the communities are made in the forest. Town meetings, and most men, women, they are sacred forests, they tend to make those decisions there. So we must rely on the cultural aspects of that. But also, the UK has this citizen science program, and we can learn from it too as well, and prioritize conservation and environmental education for young people coming up. Clearly, the older generation don't have interest anymore. So we have to go back to the basic, start designing an appreciation curriculum for what conservation is and how important it is. And we can only start from there and move up. 10, 12 years, 20 years from now, I believe the next future generation will become more conscious of that. That's just one of the ways we can start to go. We also need to ensure that people are clearing the forest to construct homes. So we must be able to find ways in which, what are the alternatives? Population is continuously expanding, so we must be able to find way, where we can start maybe investing in restoration, reforestation areas, something like that. We can always try. Concerning women participation, what we've learned, not because you saw that picture of the woman making decision or having, trying to write something, but our systems are not like that. Men always want to make those decisions on behalf of the entire community. So what we've been able to do is try to separate them as much as possible, because women tend to talk to women better. So most times, whenever we are engaging women, we try to engage them as separate as much as possible to get their views and to ensure that they are reflected as much as possible. But to implement a conservation project, rights-based approach, you need to follow it, and free, prior, informed consent principles, you also need to ensure that it works. But you can only do that through collaboration. The men in the communities have to feel that you are not a threat, so it means that you have to work to get trust, and it takes a long time.
Thank you. The question around education perfectly sets up the final panel, and I'm sure the education panel will answer all these questions in greater detail. But I have a question at the back.
Thank you very much. Mine goes to either of the panelists. Is about politics of money and finance when it comes to matters environment and the earth. And conventional funding and partners have always been more geared to making profit over people. So now that we've realized global economic system is very empirical, how do we ensure that we protect our environment and still develop and ensure that we get out of poverty, and it's not matters of green revolution being there to help the profit makers, carbon credits not geared to the profit makers? How do we ensure that we protect our environment but still develop it and ensure that we are not controlled with the current conventional financing system? Thank you.
So, Anil, do you want to take a crack at that?
Absolutely. So when I first got involved with carbon credits about 4 years ago, I was shocked with, if you consider data to be the fuel for any digital mechanisms, how much of it is controlled by actors outside of Africa for projects within Africa. So there's almost no capacity for data gathering of the same resolution that we have elsewhere in the global north. And so this has to change because we need local data collection from the ground. So for example, the citizen science initiatives, which involve compensating the people who are actually doing the work on the ground and using that land. And we also need to make sure that, that there's transparency in these processes. So if you take carbon credits, there's many projects we've seen where 80% of the value of the carbon credit goes towards non-local actors, so anyone in the value chain. And our hope with these new mechanisms is that sunlight is the best disinfectant. So by having transparency throughout the chain of verification, that it'll be obvious where the money's going. And then any buyer can ascertain for themselves if they think it's a just mechanism for that carbon credit. Right now, though, we have the opposite. So it is the case that it's a highly opaque system, and if you buy a carbon credit, there's no way of finding out exactly what's going on. So we have to shift to transparency, shift to lots of eyes looking at the problem, and making sure that we capacity build on the ground of the continent to make sure that the data gathering is equitable, just, and represents the actual people who are being judged for their hardworking actions on the ground as well.
And just to add, we must also, as we transition more towards carbon trade, we must also be able to work with countries that are involved to have the right carbon trading frameworks in place. Unfortunately, most countries that are involved in these carbon trading, they don't really have, and some are still tweaking it as they go. But another point, we must also realize that conservation and development should not compete against one another or each other. They should complement one another, as much as possible. And so to do that, we must work with local authorities to ensure that the principles of transparency, accountability, the rule of law takes effect.
Thank you. I think we have a question here.
Thank you so much for two really interesting presentations. So I have a question for you, Professor Anil, and actually I think a conversation between the two of you would be one of the responses to this question. But I was wondering, in this sort of cutting edge kind of space, if there's space for critical conversations about the colonial origins of conservation. So I'm thinking particularly about the East African context, where really the whole idea of conservation was to protect the natural environment from Africans who are destroying it, and protecting that environment for essentially white colonial officials and then Western tourists. And that underpins everything about how conservation works today. So in Uganda, one of the worst human rights abuses is the authority responsible for managing wildlife, because there's an understanding, as far as the state is concerned, that you have to protect the wildlife in terms of tourism and to keep Western donors happy. So as you're kind of thinking about these new methodologies and new ways of approaching kind of climate change financing and trying to push the needle forward, is there an opportunity to have a really critical conversation about where all of this came from? Thanks.
Anil, do you want to respond first, and then we'll...
So, I was nodding vigorously when I was listening to Borwin's talk there, because often the language of the North is couched in technical jargon and complexity. As you saw from my talk, right? We're trying to map concepts from carbon credits to what is actually happening on the ground. And it's just been a grueling process to kind of go through that. But equally though, there's one thing I think I've understood from the entire conservation conversation, which is the world's land is essentially full now, worldwide. And so anytime we convert one bit of land somewhere on the world for either human use or natural use, it has an impact somewhere else, and that can often be in a different country. And so what is happening now is that in Europe, for example, we're de-intensifying agriculture because of organic food and so on. And this is leading to a loss of agricultural productivity here. And often Africa is being viewed as a cheap source of free land to continue expansion. So that whole colonial conversation is continuing globally, and it's obvious when you look at the data. So the opportunity here is for us to, again, show global data sets and to tie together these causes and effects. So we can say that, well, this land here was deforested in Sierra Leone because of a demand for soya that came from a loss in productivity because of organic food practices in Europe, and blame the right people for that. Don't blame the local people in Sierra Leone for deforesting their own place. It's global demand that's causing this thing as well. So the critical conversation essentially comes down to, I think, understanding that there's global causality in all of this, and that blame has to be traced back to the demand, and that demand is often coming from the global north as well.
Thanks, Bob.
Well, I totally agree. We had the previous panel, and the previous panel talked about, you know, the trade or the forced looting of, you know, I don't want to go there as much as possible because that's a very tricky topic. But conservation should not be accusatory for local people. If it is ever packaged that way, it will never succeed. And until we fully understand what just transition is, and until we fully define what fairness is, until we fully, you know, until we stop the process of overly twisting and frustrating communities, you know, by preventing them to have access, conservation will not succeed. People have always lived with nature. And for us to ensure that that happens, we must be able to have partnership in a fair way. I mean, that's just where I'll stop. It's deep, but I mean, I don't want to get radical in the room.
You're absolutely welcome to get radical in a room, but Bowen, I think we have to come to a close for this session. Thank you both for a really wonderful pair of talks. Eric, thank you for your keynote. It was really a wonderful start to the session. Thank you to the audience. You've been wonderful and participated very actively. I think we just have a 20-minute break, and then we'll reconvene in this room for the final session and the wrapping up.